And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan. Happy Thanksgiving, and this is your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Thursday, November 27th, 2025. And to set things up, this Thanksgiving Day, we do have an area of low pressure crossing through Bristol Bay that's going to quickly track to the north-northwest up through the Bering Strait and lower Chuck GC by Friday morning. That has sent a surge of moisture and milder temperatures north up into along the Gulf Coast, western Gulf up into Cook Inlet. There is some moderate to locally heavier snow falling in through the mountains of the eastern Kenai Peninsula and up around Prince William Sound. And as a result, we expect into Friday IFR conditions to continue along the northern Gulf Coast in through Prince William Sound, the eastern Kenai. There's going to be another low pressure impulse and a shot of moisture kind of just turning into this region and reinforcing the earlier batch. And if that's not enough, later this weekend as we get into Sunday, there's going to be two areas of low pressure, one south of the Aleutians and another one coming up out of the North Pacific into the western Gulf that's going to bring a wider surge of heavier precipitation and gusty winds all along the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle. So more inclement weather will be shaping up here over the southern areas of the mainland into the Panhandle as we go through late in the holiday weekend. So Friday morning, IFR conditions along the YK deltas and extending inland there at Bristol Bay. Also along the Arctic coast, we find some lower clouds and ceilings there, especially from Point Lay on over to Kaktovik and Demarcation Bay. For Friday afternoon, still IFR conditions out over the Gulf and from the eastern Kenai, Prince William Sound, through Cape Suckling and Yakutat. And then as we look to the north, still a band of IFR conditions along the Arctic coast and in through the Lisburn Peninsula. Also, we have IFR conditions creeping northward from that low that'll be down in the North Pacific that's going to lift up toward the Aleutians. Stronger winds, too. There will be turbulence along especially the central Aleutians and potentially some low-level wind shear as we have some pretty strong winds coming up there from the North Pacific. For Saturday morning, still lingering IFR conditions around the eastern Kenai, Portage Pass, Prince William Sound, lower Copper River Basin, McCarthy on over toward Yakutat. Still easterly drier flow, I should have mentioned, for Friday, actually this Thanksgiving Day into Friday. High pressure situated over the Yukon Northwest Territories, maxing out around 1045 millibars. So that's pumping drier and colder air in across the Panhandle, kind of holding the leading edge of this precipitation from making much more eastward advancement. And then we have up here across areas of the interior VFR conditions, but lingering IFR pushing up into the lower north slope from around New Exit and Dead Horse through Kaktovik. And then we see increasing IFR conditions along the central and eastern Aleutians associated with an occluded front that's wrapped around this low pressure system in the North Pacific. And then Saturday, we start to see things take shape Saturday afternoon. We have one low back here toward the Aleutians, and then a front that extends northeastward. And along this front, there will be a secondary low pressure system developed that will lift up into the Gulf, western Gulf on Sunday. And that's going to spread a broad area of moderate to locally heavy precipitation and gusty winds along the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle, especially as we go through Sunday into Sunday night. So it'll be an active weather pattern there along the Gulf Coast throughout this longer holiday weekend. Passes in the north at the Brooks Range, Anatuvik Pass, generally VFR conditions, but you get out around and past the north entrance, MVFR. Same thing, Adigan Pass, starting out MVFR, becoming VFR on Friday, but MVFR conditions lingering around and north of the north entrance. Lake Clark and Merrill with the upslope flow there. We're looking at IFR conditions for Friday. Same thing, Rainy Pass, IFR conditions. Windy Pass, VFR becoming MVFR on Friday. And the same thing as at Bell Pass, starting out early Friday, VFR becoming MVFR. And Mentasta Pass far enough east, drier, colder air, VFR conditions expected there. Copper River Basin, Tanita Pass, MVFR conditions, and then dropping down along the Gulf Coast there, especially around Prince William Sound. Portage Pass, and they're out into Prince William Sound, IFR conditions for Friday, MVFR. back toward the west entrance. And then in the far northern panhandle, generally VFR conditions expected at Chilkoot and White, and should hold on to that at least through the day Friday, but changes coming later in the weekend as strong front with plenty of precipitation and moisture moves northeastward. So looking at the freezing levels, at the surface freezing line continues to be out here over the central Bering Sea between St. Matthew, St. Paul, and then dipping a little bit down toward the central Alaska Peninsula and coming up along the eastern Kenai and along the Gulf Coast and in toward the outer panhandle, because we've had a colder, drier northeasterly flow coming in off Canada because of that circulation around that strong high pressure. But freezing levels do rise across the panhandle from 2,000 to 4,000, 6,000 feet, and finally upwards of 8,000 feet south end of Haida Gwaii, and once you get near Vancouver Island. And where there is precipitation, we have the one low that today is Bristol Bay is already up here into the Chukchi Sea, and snow showers around there could have some icing above 3,000 feet. As we get down here, though, into southeast mainland along the northeastern Gulf Coast into the far western panhandle, we could find some moderate icing in precipitation producing clouds above 4,000 and 6,000 feet. This edge might be a little too aggressive for Friday daytime, but certainly as we get into Friday and Saturday, it's going to try to push more toward the east. Better chance of that on Sunday. And then down here to the south, we have strong low with the occluded front, windy conditions, strong winds, as I mentioned, turbulence, low-level wind shear there across the Aleutians. Looking at the upper-level jet stream pattern, we find northwest winds across the southwest mainland, lower Cook Inlet, out to just south of the Gulf, above 100 to 115 knots. And as we bring it down to 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, we have that secondary low that's going to come up into the western Gulf. So ahead of it, we find southwest winds could be 30 to 40 knots. Prince of Wales Island to west of Haida Gwaii, but more importantly here, back toward the Aleutians, we find a band of 40 to 50 knot winds coming up from the south. And then at 3,000 feet, very clearly, we can see where the trouble area is going to be Friday when it comes to turbulence. Broad area of 50 to 60 knot winds at 3,000 feet associated with that stronger low in the North Pacific. So as that creeps a bit northeastward, that's going to increase the winds, especially through the central and eastern Aleutians, where there will be, at the very least, moderate to perhaps even isolated severe turbulence, especially later Friday afternoon into Friday evening, along with low-level wind shear. We do find a few pockets of stronger winds out here toward Cape Suckling, Kayak Island, outside of Hinchinbrook entrance. Locally, some winds could be upwards around or 40 to 45 knots. And also off the Lisburn Peninsula, there might be a little stronger winds, 30, 35 knots there. And so the greatest threat for some turbulence on Friday will be first out here, Prince William Sound, Chugach Mountains, coastal mountains there around the northwest end of the Gulf, surface to 5,000 feet. But by far, the most extensive area of turbulence will extend out along the eastern and central Aleutians on Friday, surface to 4,000 feet with the potential for some isolated severe turbulence and low-level wind shear in this region, especially coming up into the central Aleutians as we get into Friday afternoon and Friday night.